Okay. When I was asked to step in to this, I was asked to talk sort of on media and my experience of it from a personal experience, and sort of a little bit on public understanding and public engagement as well. And I was only asked to do this a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't had it, so it's a little bit impressionistic, but I hope it'll offer some interesting thoughts at least. So when we're thinking about the Norman Conquest, we've talked about this a lot. We talked about the breakout groups, how people perceive it. It is a kind of media superstar in as much as an awful lot of people have heard of it in a way that they may not have heard of Kett's Rebellion or the Anarchy of Stephen Matilda or whatever. It is one of those things that the people have kind of heard of. And for this reason, this can be, we see this debated a lot. And in preparing for this, I just went and had a sort of search on some of the social media, Facebook and so on. So there's, I appreciate nobody's going to be able to see this, otherwise we're quite this far away. But, we've got these sort of debates. The Norman Conquest was a disaster for England. We should celebrate Naseby, not Hastings. Daniel Hannon is writing here. And it's the sort of, he's a journalist, he's writing popular stuff, he's got his nice English heritage, castle sites there. Most of that's not actually Norman period, but it's there are. But yes, after 1066, the country was clenched in a mailed fist. The Norman Conquest was a cataclysm. Castles, until then, a rarity. She does suggest it's a little bit up to speed with the debate as to whether any castles predate the Norman Conquest. Many still stand, handsome and crenellated, he reluctantly admits. These were not defences against the foreign foe, instruments of internal repression, from whose arrow slits new proprietors peered out at a beat of people. And so that's very much the line he's taken. And then you can go on to almost immediately the next sort of next line on it. We Normans made England what it is today, says the rather interestingly named Harry de Ketterville. I'll come back to that a little bit later. And he's taken this is the land from which the Normans, I should say we Normans, sprang instead to launch the conquest of this island. The process began 950 years ago. Edward Confessor died, blah, blah, blah. It's all this idea that these freemen plotting about in Northumbria and Fens had no idea that their lives were their language, their laws, their society, their religious beliefs, and yes, their penchant for long girly hair, he says, were about to be annihilated by a band of shaven-headed foreigners with an unseemly love of horses. I think he's been watching Vikings. Or at least that's the narrative. And then he's going on to say that actually, we can look at this in other sorts of ways. It goes to talk about the Norman legacies lasting longer than just the battle, the monuments, Clare Castle, he says, or Leeds. I'm not sure I'd have chosen those ones myself, but that's what I look at, the architectural treasures these Norman zealots created, great churches, cathedrals, Ely, Peterborough, Durham, the Domesday Book record, he says, boy, we Normans have got a bad press, he says. Anglo-Saxon England did not die in 1066. The Normans did import some astonishing achievements. And are these marvels not now English, just as I am English? And I refer back to his surname. So downhearted children, next time your teacher bangs on about Harold getting socked in the eye, the English didn't lose at Hastings, we won. So it's interesting how this debate does get picked up. And this is initially both from the Daily Telegraph. But on one of these items, there's also one of these sort of periodic quizzes. We were talking about surveys earlier in the breakout group. And they said, was the Norman Conquest a good thing? So going back to the Sellers and Yeatman question, the options are yes, it made us what we are today. No, it's the other option, throw off the Norman yoke. And then who knows, it's happened, and that's all there is to say. The only way I could work out how to get the data out of this was actually to answer the question. So I thought I'd be slightly perverse and go for yes, it made us what we are today. But what it interestingly threw up was the results. And in fact, 19% said yes, it made us what we are today. 34% said no, throw off the Norman yoke, and the rest of them sort of just said, who cares, it happened, who knows, it happened, that's all there is to say. So the Daily Telegraph online website readers are generally of the throw off the Norman yoke persuasion. So when I was thinking about kind of engaging with the media, or whether the media is engaging with the Norman Conquest, and what we as people who know something about it, are studying it, are specialising in it, might think we have something useful to offer in terms of perspectives. There are opportunities and threats in this. So the opportunities that we can, wider publics can become more knowledgeable, they can understand the research process better. That's picking up on some of the points that have already been made this afternoon. As a result of that, perhaps archaeology will be better cared for, the actual physical resource. People will care about it more. It will be easier to get resources to curate it. Wider publics perhaps will understand the world better if they understand how knowledge is gained, and the subtleties perhaps of the was it a good thing, was it a bad thing type arguments. And then there's the sort of enhancement of well-being through engaging with purposeful, stimulating, thought-provoking activity. But there are threats. There's a professional threat. Anyone engaging with the media will know that slightly nauseating experience of sort of, oh my God, this is going to all turn horribly sour. There's the possibility that publics will be alienated, either by something that one has said oneself, someone else has said about something, or the way something has been presented. There's the risk that people will misunderstand the past, and that's causation, and that public opinion could be manipulated, and I'll come back to that. And then, of course, all of this, potentially archaeology is endangered if it's not, if people aren't sympathetic to it, people don't feel interested in it, don't feel it has some meaning and value to them. I'm just going to go through just one or two sort of examples of some of my experience that are sort of related broadly to the Norman Conquest and the Norman period. And I have a long sort of range of experience in different sorts of media, but I'm just going to run through a few, and I'm going to focus in particular on Great British Story at the top there, and a little bit on the Clare Castle excavations as well, and just start through a couple of the other things as well. The Great British Story was a TV documentary presented by Michael Wood. It was filmed mostly in 2011. It was broadcast in 2012. It was filmed in 2011 and 12. Broadcast in 2012 as part of the. So it was the same year that Britain was having the Olympics, or London was having the Olympics. It was all a bit of a sort of big year like that. It was just we were 4 years into the post-Kuwait recession. Everyone needed a bit cheering up, you know. Anyhow, so this programme was made, this series was made, and it was actually a follow-up to a previous series called The Story of England. So this is broadening out to focus on Britain. A series of programmes, 8 programmes, of which one of which was called The Norman Yoke, which kind of tells you immediately where Mike's coming from on this. And the idea of the people's history was it was going to be a bottom-up history. It wasn't going to be a kings and princes Game of Thrones, and I say that I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I kind of know vaguely what seems to be going on, I think. Anyway, it was going to be a bottom-up people's history series, and when they were planning it, we'd already worked with them on the Story of England series, doing some test pit excavation in Kidworth in Leicestershire. They'd asked us if we'd like to be involved again in this one, doing some work in Long Melford, and while we were sort of developing that, they said they wanted a castle site. So did I know the castle site? Was I doing any digging or anything to do with the Norman Conquest? And by fluke, we were actually doing a Heritage Lottery funded community excavation at the site from Mount Viewers on the Suffolk-Essex border, just into Essex, in fact, at that time. So you can see there's a castle there. The lump in the background is a large mound covered in trees. As you can see, it's very close to the church. In fact, that has been suggested that the Castle Bailey, which doesn't appear to be evident in any other location, may actually simply be the churchyard. We were doing some excavation both on the top of the mound to see if any structures there, and some test fitting around it as community dig, so it sort of soaks up additional labour, but also to see what was going on around the bottom of the mound and a couple of long trenches. So they came and filmed. Mike came and filmed the excavations on the top there, fairly close to the beginning, which is often a little bit of a mistake. And we had this sort of conversation about, well, you know, it's an enormous, great big mound. Look how it's dominating the landscape. Look, you can see the landscape from around it. You know, it's all about Norman power, imposition of new authority and that kind of thing. And the same programme then picked up, you know, some other themes. So it looked at Bremer of Dagworth, who features in Doomsday Book, and they filmed actually in the garden of the probable house of, well, not the original house, obviously, but where the Hall house that now stands on that spot, probably, about Bremer at Dagworth, who was killed at Hastings and is dispossessed by this. And there's discussion about the long, this programme, Mike talks about the long tail of it, the fact that people with French names, even today, tend to be better off, go to the more expensive schools, more highly represented in our political elites and so on. Which takes us back to Norman, what's his name, to Ketterville. And it even makes the wonderful point, which I would have thought if you were trying to shift anyone as the benefits of the Norman Conquest up against Saxon Bremer, he said, Darcy would have been a Norman. I'm not actually quite sure about that, but it could have come on over a bit later. But yeah, just wonderful bit of sort of thinking about the long-term implications of these sort of population replace, or, you know, these decapitations, as it were. And we did some test bit digging in Long Melford, talked to Kentwell about the evidence was coming up, the little fragments of pottery, that these bits of Thetford ware could have been touched by people who'd actually experienced, you know, been dispossessed by the Norman Conquest. And they did a nice reconstruction of the timber tower on top of the mound, for which we found absolutely no archaeological evidence whatsoever. We found a grand total of 7 sherds of medieval pottery in a 9-metre square L-shaped trench there, so I don't think there was a timber tower. Nonetheless, it kind of made the point about landscape domination. And in fact, and I was looking at this again, I watched this episode again earlier this week, so preparing for today. And at the time, I really enjoyed the series, and some of you may have watched it. But watching it again, I actually feel really uneasy about it. What bothers me is not the reconstruction of the castle, which is fine. Some lots have buildings on top, other ones don't, and it's a good example. See a digging process, link it to people because there are people taking part, and to talk about the domination, the building of the castles, the new monuments, all the rest of that. What bothers me about it is not actually really this, so much as this sort of thing, because when you listen to Mike talking about this is the people's country, the people of Forge against subversive. It all sounds now terribly, well, pro-Brexit, I suppose, nationalistic. And this was back in 2011, 2012, this was being made, and some English nationalism sort of thing was just it's a kind of national front, it's not really a thing people thought about very much. You now look at it, 1066 is constantly being picked up as, you know, the last time, and this is why Norman Farage wears the Bayeux tapestry tie, you know, stitch ups in the Bayeux tapestry. It's funny, the Doomsday Book doesn't seem to come up as much, but, you know, there's people here saying, oh, it's fantastic, you know, I can't wait, I'm very excited. I don't know why they procrastinated for so long, says Bob Smith, a carpenter. You know, Joe proudly tells how his family goes all the way back to Hastings in the 11th century. Brilliantly, the concept of being governed by an unelected body would have been absolutely abhorrent to anyone in those days. But it does highlight the kind of problems, if you like, of that kind of when you're dealing with the media or involved with the media. There are huge opportunities to promote archaeology, promote the work you're doing, put across a nuanced way of thinking about the past, looking at weighing up evidence, all of those sorts of things. But there's always that possibility that these things get picked up, get manipulated, and people's ideas they'll grab onto what they want, they'll take out what they want from something they've heard or half read, and run with it. Just to go through a few other, this is something else I did not very long ago, summer 2016, Radio 4. I think radio is a fantastic medium for when you're looking at media and history and archaeology. Tends to be more considered. You know, this was that I want to do something about sort of how testing excavations tell you about village development, particularly thinking about Black Death and Norman Conquest cropped up. This is a radio programme. Okay, they insisted, they came out and we dug a new test pit, so the sound could be authentic. I had Tom Holland came all the way to Sleaford at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday to, you know, record this live. And That was a magazine programme. I haven't been involved with Digging for Britain, for example. I think there's magazine programmes where it's a kind of news reporting, and they're interested in the archaeology you've got for what it is, and they're not trying to fit it into a bigger narrative, and they're not trying to make it support some other sort of argument, is it? Or they're not trying to, you know, you're not campaigning for anything. It's just that this is interesting, this has come up. So I'm very pro-radio for this sort of thing. Print media, very old-fashioned it would seem, but it's amazing how getting something into, and this isn't the Norman Conquest, but it's just an example recently of something where we use the Black Death, sort of looking at the population collapse that's come out of work we've done in villages in the 14th century. Norman Conquest is as good, if not better, a hook for this sort of thing. But, you know, an item like this in the Times, written by an archaeologist, Norman Hammond, the archaeology correspondent for the Times. It's a great way. Get in touch with these people, know these people, Maeve Kennedy, people like that who are interested in archaeology. You know, you can email them, say you're doing something. And for the Times, this balloon out to this was a huge article on the Washington Post at the time, just during the American election, actually. It's a fantastic, at one point, one of these adverts says, dig deeper on the candidates for the presidential post. And this is immediately beside one of our people, digging deeper. It's a pity they didn't dig a bit deeper on the American candidate one. Would it have made any difference? Then another thing is sort of TV news. Very short turnaround, you know, that sometimes it'll be an incidental news story, sometimes it'll be because something needs to be saved or something needs to have money spent on it. This was something the Charter of the Forest, the anniversary of the Charter of the Forest last year, of course, which is the reissue of Magna Carta, which of course is the kind of, it's the other end of the Norman Conquest story in a way, isn't it? If the Norman Conquest is the oppression and Magna Carta is the liberation, if you're being very simple about it like that. But this was, you know, BBC Breakfast had decided they were going to come and film on the day we were launching the Charter of the Forest. And they did three 6-minute-long slots broadcast from dawn up on the castle battlements, talking about the Charter of the Forest. And it's just that sort of opportunity. You only get a couple of sentences. You've got to really think about what those sentences are going to be. But it is a fantastic opportunity to get something like the Charter of the Forest, which one would imagine 99.79% of the people have probably not heard of before 2017. And it certainly doesn't have that resonance that the Norman Conquest of 1066 does. And then Tennessee excavations is another castle site. This is Clare in Suffolk. Again, we had the community dig that big castle mound there with a shell keep on top of it. We had a series of trenches in the Bailey. This was in 2013. And this, again, that different sort of, it's all public engagement, but this is sort of outreach rather than media. It's in the middle of Clare, which is not the city metropolis, but it's a very nice town, and it has quite a lot of visitors. It has a very lively community. We had thousands of people visiting. I think we had 2,500 visitors on site. We had people following local radio broadcasts and local media, local press. We always helped if you've got a skeleton. If we had the battle cemetery from Hastings, we would not be moaning about not having anything to put in the museums. Just imagine how that would transform our ability to sort of museumify the Norman Conquest. But the interesting thing about this was that there was a documentary record for a college of priests, college of canons at Clare before the Norman Conquest, and they were moved out just after it. So there was a great opportunity to talk about, well, you know, the mound looks as if it's Norman, but it could be a prehistoric mound, and Jim Muir, of course, did work on that, haven't heard the results yet, or I haven't. But that whole question was, we found the burials and traces of buildings there, and some timber post holes, particularly timber buildings. Was that, is it before or after the Norman Conquest? If they're reusing existing site, is that telling us something a bit different? A different story to this huge, enormous, great big castle imposed on the landscape? Is it actually suggesting they're reusing the existing site? They're trying to reinforce their authority by gaining that from a pre-existing site. And it was an opportunity to be able to discuss those sort of ideas with people who turned up. And we really got very good feedback data. We'd asked people if they'd take more interest in archaeology and heritage of the site afterwards? Would they be more interested in archaeology and heritage generally? And would they recommend that sort of activity to others? So we know something. We've got a lot more impact data, which I won't go through in detail, I haven't got time. How much longer have I got? Am I close to... Oh, wow, okay. I didn't check the time I started, sorry. And then, okay, so just finally then, another, again, sort of outreach type project that I've been involved with, involving teenagers and indeed members of the wider public in excavations in rural villages to reconstruct the historical development of those villages, not as a way of looking at the Norman Conquest or Black Death or anything else in particular, just seeing what it could tell us about those places, how those places developed. And while there were lots of aims to this project, what it did do was produce a huge amount of data on these sites. So this map is Perth in Hertfordshire. There is a Clare Castle here. And each of those coloured squares is the location of one 1 metre square test pit. Not, I would point out, shown to scale. But what it did do was enable us to track the development of Perth. So we could see, in the Roman period, the circles are where pottery is turned up. We've got a large settlement up there, a smaller one down here. Sadly, or rather slightly frustratingly, the one place we don't really know anything about is Norman Castle, because it's scheduled, so we can't dig in that at all. Nonetheless, it will be there for the future. We can see the Roman village disappeared in the early Anglo-Saxon period. We could see the village founded again on its present footprint, rather than sort of off at the northwest edge, founded on its present footprint in the late Anglo-Saxon period, with obviously something quite exciting going on down here, which does make one wonder if you've got, again, there's the possibility, okay, you've got a pre-existing late Anglo-Saxon Fenny or something like that there. And then you can see sort of what the area that the settlement's covering in the Anglo-Saxon period. It's clearly mainly this area, nothing really coming from this area here near the Moth Main, nothing from the north of the village. And what you can then see in the next period, which is the sort of pottery really, it's going from the early 12th to the early 14th century, you can see very vividly how the village has grown after the immediate Norman Conquest into the Norman period. This area here in particular, which produced virtually one tiny 4-gram sherd of Anglo-Saxon pottery from one of all of these pits, producing large amounts of pottery in the Norman period. Close to the area was a modern Bailey. The church is 12th century. There's actually an Anglo-Saxon church in the garden of the pub at the back there. They found it during excavation. It's not standing there. The church was moved deliberately. Certainly, this church is probably founded in the Norman period with the modern Bailey castle, which may well be taking over perhaps an earlier site of some significance, and then creating a village on the edge. And also, we can see how dramatically the settlement is growing at this time. So that's a chance to sort of talk about a slightly different kind of narrative. It's a bit of evidence for the kind of other side of the argument about how something like the Norman Conquest affected the lives in the medium and longer term of ordinary people living in rural Hertfordshire. And we can see this again and again. So this is from 47 of these villages. This is the sort of amount of the number of sites that produce a couple of sherds or more of pottery before the Norman Conquest, and this is afterwards, or after about 1100. Sadly, William the Conqueror did not demand that everyone start using a completely different form of pottery and banish all use of previous pottery, which would have been hugely helpful if he had done. But you can sort of see the difference. And again, it's these lots more sites are producing evidence of people-intensive activity by humans. So you've got that kind of economic boom. And Michael's already shown us the evidence from the Port of Antiquities scheme, similar patterns appearing in the metal finds as well. And we can see this again and again across the area. And this is also an activity that has a positive impact on the kids who take part as well. And we actually do a very detailed assessment of the skills they get from this and assess the percentage who feel the activity helped with those skills, which is shown in blue there. And of course, what we tend to get, and again, I've mentioned radio, local press is a fantastic source of actually getting sort of getting a bit of a news story out, having a bit of a practice with a news story. Local papers are struggling these days. They are delighted if you would effectively write their story for them. So you can send a copy in, they will send people out. Particularly if you've got, kids and archaeology is a great combination. It's good for photographs. Archaeology is great for photographs. Many stories are not good for photographs, but archaeology is. So what we've got here then is a series of different sorts of kind of media engagement, public engagement, community outreach in different sorts of ways. And this is just a sort of brief summary of those there. And I'm not going to read through that because I've really just talked this through. But there's such a diversity of opportunity. But there's also, it is difficult necessarily to always anticipate how things are going to go. Norman Conquest does, I think, offer almost unparalleled opportunities to tune into a latent knowledge that wider publics have. It kind of rings a bell in Norman Conquest. So you'll draw public interest and you can attract media attention as well. But as a consequence of this, anything with power has, responsibility. It is very vulnerable to being manipulated. And maybe I'm just looking at this very harshly, in particular, sort of this kind of a kind of liminal zone between the Brexit vote and it actually going through, if it does. But nonetheless, it does feel that that holds in the nationalist argument feeling more comfortable at the moment. So because of this, public engagement is particularly important. This is not a reason not to do it, but it is a strong reason to do it, but to be careful. Public engagement can generate lasting legacies, and that media work can have a long tail. Something you did 10 years ago was absolutely fine at the time, can start to look a little bit creaky, when you look back at it, and you think, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't said that, that doesn't kind of work well now. But I think, and the other point, of course, which I'm sure you all know, is that, you very rarely have very much editorial control. You have to accept, you have to try and, just accept that you won't, if you're being asked to write an article for the Daily Telegraph, it needs to be done by 5 p.m. this afternoon, they've rung you at 10. They're not going to send it back to you for 3 corrections and then put it in tomorrow. They want it this afternoon. I was asked to do this about church law and the church is applying for consent to mine underneath people's houses and things recently, and if you say yes, then you've got to accept that's the terms it's being done on. Don't underestimate that. I think local media, like local radio, is hugely valuable because they are more sensitive and more better at listening in a way to what you're actually doing. So the key thing is, I don't want to turn a lecture on handling media or anything, but understand your brief, know your media, know your audience, know who it is you're dealing with. Just check what have they what has this journalist done recently? If you don't like the things they've been publishing recently, maybe just think twice about it. You got the Today programme, they'll push you into giving an answer, and you have to sort of think very carefully what you're going to say in advance. And the other thing is that clear and open communication. We have a responsibility there. If we're on a community dig, everyone needs to know what's going on. How are the decisions being made? What's been found today? How does it change from yesterday? You don't have time off of that nuance in broadcast media, but it's very important at the face-to-face level. But again, clear and open communication. And I think the more cogent, the more concise but accurate and understandable we can make the message, then the more likely it is to be relayed and received as we intend. Somebody else has to look at it and say, well, I've got to shorten that down because they've waffled on far too long and I need to get 2 minutes out of that. It will get cut down and edited. But if you've done the initial bit is so perfect, it makes sense and it gets the message across, then that's less likely to happen. And I think this highlights the sort of thing that I think probably this whole seminar series is intended at, is kind of what is the message actually? What do we think about the Norman Conquest? What is the story? It's not quite is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? But, what do we want people to hear about the archaeology of the Norman Conquest and the Norman period? Thank you very much.